What's the tea? Welcome everyone to Trust and Trade, your weekly glimpse into hot topics in the world of antitrust and consumer protection.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the short podcast series sponsored by the Economics Committee, where we hope to give you the highlights of our latest programming. Your host today is Gabriela Antonie, and joining us is Masha Melkonyan. Masha is an analyst in the antitrust and competition practice at Charles Rivers Associates in Chicago. She works on mergers, acquisitions, and analyzes market behaviors that can potentially dispute competition. Masha, thanks for being with us.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks, Gabriela.
In March, you reported on a panel hosted by the ABA Antitrust Law Section about machine learning and its connection to antitrust, which featured Dr. Ai Deng, principal in the antitrust and competition practice at Charles Rivers Associates, and a lecturer at Johns Hopkins University, and also Dr. Thibaut Schreppel, associate professor of law at Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, and a faculty affiliate at Stanford University Code X Center.
Yep, that's right.
Great. So today we'd actually like to revisit that topic. Recent events have brought this issue to the forefront of many antitrust discussions. So we would like to recap some of that program and the developments, if that makes sense to you. And yep. Masha, before discussing the more complicated highlights of the program, let's start with an introduction to machine learning and how it is relevant for the antitrust community. Do you mind?
Sure. So machine learning is becoming increasingly popular during this time when almost every aspect of our lives depends on technology. But what is machine learning? It doesn't have a single definition. Dr. Deng referenced Tom Mitchell's definition, which says, a computer program is set to learn from experience with respect to some tasks if its performance improves with experience. It is interesting to note here that this isn't too different from how humans learn. Dr. Deng also referenced Stuart Russell and Peter Narvik saying artificial intelligence can be defined as thinking and acting humanly and thinking and acting rationally. We mentioned two terms, machine learning and artificial learning. They are treated as largely equal in antitrust. However, they're not exactly the same. The distinctions won't necessarily come up for us today, but it is something interesting to note. Learning isn't intelligence, but rather it is a way of achieving intelligence.
So that's interesting. And I think you already mentioned this, but this somehow reminds me of how we humans think. Is there a connection between machine and human learning?
Oh, yes. As it turns out, machines mimic our learning methods, and they do this in three main paths. So one of them is examples, differences, and trial and error. We're going to talk about the first and the last ways. So let's start with examples. A very common way of learning for us humans is learning with pictures, and pictures here serve as examples. Let's say we are shown several pictures of horses, and within several shots, we're able to construct a mental structure of a horse. So when shown an image of a purple one, our brains can easily recognize the animal despite its unusual color. In antitrust, machine learning through examples can be achieved with regression. For example, if we're looking for a relationship between price and costs, we use regression to study that relationship using a set of examples, which in this case is our price and cost data. The data is also often called training data, meaning the machine trains itself using the data. In literature, this is known as supervised learning. Some examples are artificial neural network, deep learning, deep neural network. And recently, there have been some concerns around deep learning and how machines might learn to collude through it. But we will talk about this in a little once we're done with our introduction. I also mentioned that the other way is trial and error. So in literature, this is known as reinforcement learning. This way is also very common for humans when growing up and throughout our lives in general. For example, looking for clear cell phone signals in an unfamiliar location. A person will move around to find good service and will stay there once found. Getting a good signal would be classified as positive reinforcement. In machine learning, this example translates into one of the most relevant bases for artificial intelligence, AI algorithms, which is reinforcement learning without human intervention.
Interesting. And what are some of the issues related to machine learning that the antitrust community is concerned with?
During the panel, Dr. Schreppel and Dr. Deng talked about colluding and also the issue of blockchains.
And when you mention colluding, do you mean that machines decide to collude on their own?
That's exactly the concern. Algorithmic collusion has raised growing interest and concern as it describes the process of how two machines, like you said, decide to collude independently from humans. Dr. Schreppel mentioned that according to Google Scholar, there were 177 papers that have mentioned this subject in 2021. On the other hand, there are no actual cases facing algorithmic collusion across the globe.
Interesting. So, what does this even mean?
This means either there indeed is no issue or the issue is present, but it has not been detected.
And it sounds as if there is still so much more to find out about machine learning and artificial intelligence.
Yes, that's right. Even Dr. Schreppel mentioned that whatever he was telling about in the program was relevant to that point of time because we don't know what findings we're going to have in the next 2, 5, or 10 years.
Wow. And continuing on what we more or less know now, you mentioned the issue of blockchains. What does that represent? Can you give us a little bit more background?
Yeah, sure. In fact, the issue of blockchains is a subject that is currently not discussed as widely, possibly because of lack of public enforcement around it. But they're very important. Blockchains have a distinguishing feature of being immutable, meaning once information about past or future is given, it is held. The concern around them is that they can help companies collude. This is because if algorithms on blockchains are set up to implement collusion, they will certainly do so because of their immutability. This becomes worrisome as it means that cooperation is achieved in collusion, but collusion itself is a non-cooperative game by nature.
That does sound like it would give rise to huge antitrust issues, actually. Can you give an example of the scale we are talking about?
In 2019, there was an antitrust case of Leibowitz and Ifanix, and it is an example showing how large scale this issue can grow to become. This case is concerning a one particle blockchain called Tether, and damages there are estimated to be approximately 1.5 trillion in this antitrust matter. I think this value really shows the extent of significance that blockchains can reach in antitrust.
Wow, so that's a huge number. And are we saying that AI can indeed collude?
Dr. Deng explained that in recent years, there has been growing experimental evidence that AI can indeed collude.
And I guess this brings up an interesting question. Who would be liable for the collusion?
The presenters agreed that there are 3 candidates that could accept liability of collusion. The party using the AI, the party designing the AI, and AI itself. Currently, many ways of making sure that AI do not collude are being actively studied, and this research area is called compliance by design. However, both presenters agreed that in many ways, machine learning is still a black box. Dr. Deng mentioned the research area known as explainable artificial intelligence, and the mission of which is to help unfold the contents of the black box. Another point made was that even though at the moment we lack familiarity with what is going on inside the black box, we do observe its outputs. And Dr. Streppel agreed that it makes sense for agencies to first concentrate on this observable space and only then move on to the deeper layers. It is also useful to look at counterfactuals, which in this case is human intelligence as opposed to artificial, but the human brain is itself a rather sophisticated structure and yet another black box. So that is another complication also.
Masha, thank you for a fascinating conversation. We'll hope to have you again soon and dig deeper in some of these intricacies.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Trust in Trade, brought to you as always by the Antitrust Law Section of the American Bar Association. Now you know that's the T.